Hello, everyone. This is Jason White, and this is our second ISO podcast. First time we were talking about individual members of the factory group and the admin group, and there was one notable person missing from that conversation, and that was Richard Wilks. And we're going to be talking to him in just a moment. Just as background, when we were first working on the 1973 USAC mod, way back when we were working in another league, I needed to have sounds to go with this mod, and we didn't have any of them available. We tried in vain to create our own sounds, but it became pretty clear that we were out of our league as far as generating sounds. So we started to look for people who knew how to do this, and Richard Wilks' name came up because he'd done previous work, and we asked him if he would help us generating sounds for an Offenhauser and a Chevrolet and a Foyt, and he did a fantastic job. Little did we know that this was just the tip of the iceberg with his skill set. He's since gone on to do fantastic physics work for both previous mods we did in another league and the stuff that we're doing in ISO now. So at this point, I'll bring Richard into the conversation. Thanks so much for making the time to join us today, first of all.
Well, hello, everybody. Well, thank you for inviting me. And it's a pleasure to be here.
So, apart from what I've just said, tell us a bit about yourself, like your background and how you got involved in working on Sims.
Well, I've been a fan of the sport since I remember myself. It's been a family thing also. My grandfather was a car mechanic. My father was an amateur racer at a national level. He raced go-karts, Group A touring cars. For example, he dabbled a bit with Formula Fords also. I, of course, started playing these kinds of games since a very young age. Since the 90s, I was very young. I went through all the big names, like the Grand Prix, the IndyCar racings, NASCAR racings, etc. It rally stuff. All of that, for PC, for consoles. And, of course, as you go along, you tend to get a bit more, let's say, demanding from what you want and what you want to experience. And I remember that at some point, I downloaded some mods for F1 Challenge, and I liked a lot some of them, like the Group C mod, and there was other seasons, other F1 seasons there. But then I was like a bit disappointed because I thought that some of the guys that compiled those mods didn't do a good job of compiling the sounds. I remember that. And also there was the Group A mod that was coming out for R Factor 1. And I remember that I tried to record some of the sounds of my father's race car, the Rover, for them to use in the mod, and the Rover was fine, although they ended up not using them, but they used the sound that was okay. But then still, I wasn't very satisfied. I was like, it doesn't sound. I know how the real thing sounds. So I started looking online because I was always on forums, checking the new stuff coming out and what people were talking about these games. And I saw someone made a very nice tutorial about how to edit sounds for the ISI engine. And I was like, oh, this makes it easy, at least to start with. I can give a try to this. And this was because I had I had the program that he mentioned there, because I always had a big interest in music. So I had sound programs and stuff on my computer, and I was like, I will give this a try. And that's basically how it started. And then, of course, I did a few sounds. I did sounds for the aforementioned Group A mod. I put them on YouTube even. And I believe that's how Alberto found me on No Grip Forum, because I posted the sounds there and I posted the videos there. And he's also a big fan of those cars, and he liked the sounds I did, especially the BMW and everything. And so he contacted me and asked what you said previously, like if I would like to do sounds for the USAC mod. And I said sure. And at the time, I was already also modding physics because I started doing physics also still in F1 Challenge because there were various season mods of F1 seasons that were just League Edition. And to me, I always had some sort of, I wouldn't say a problem, but I would say I look at the League Edition mod, and to me that's an incomplete mod, always.
Well, there may be some people listening who don't understand the distinction between League and historic mod. Can you explain that real quickly, just for the uninitiated?
Now, sure, a League Edition, or what's called a League Edition in the community, is a mod where, although you have different cars, like imagine an F1 grid, the cars are different, right? You have the Williamses and Lotus and that kind of stuff. Although you have different cars, all of them have the same physics, which means all of them have the same performance. And hence the term League Edition, because apparently in other leagues, not ours, some people have a beef with their Minardi being slower than the Williams, which is fine. It's just another way of looking at the hobby. But I personally, especially because I was playing them offline just for myself, I wanted them to have the real performance. Because there was, of course, I had a few mods that were historic editions, and again, historic means that they represent historically the performance and the differences in performance between the cars. And I felt to myself, these cars look very good, and some of them did. We're talking about work from that give origin to the mods of F1 SR and stuff like that. We're talking about these kinds of models. These cars look so good, and it's a shame that they don't have physics to match the particular car. So I started dabbling with that. I started doing that. And I got the attention of the guy that was converting those big season mods from Grand Prix 4 back then to F1 Challenge, all with permission, of course, back then. And he asked me if I wanted to, join with him. So when we released a season, it would be together with historic physics and everything, and with the sounds corrected by me. And I did sounds for those cars too. And I said yes, and that's how it started. And then I went on to GTR2 because there was a mod about the BPR seasons, which is a series that I like very much. I watched it when I was young, and I did a whole revamp of the physics for that mod because it was just placeholders everywhere, and I did all the physics for the individual cars, and it was more or less at that point, because then I started looking at the R Factor and just checking out and see what was there and doing some modifications for myself. And then it was at that point that Alberto contacted me, and I went to the other league, like you mentioned, and started my work, initially with sounds.
Well, like I was saying before, we were very fortunate to run into you, and we had no clue of the depth of your skills until later on when you started working with physics. Speaking, these days in your work with ISO, we have a specific frame that we have to work within, that being Automobilista, which, as most people will probably recognize, is an R Factor 1 based engine. That's where the bones of it starts. But talk about the limitations that you have to work within for physics, as far as computers and hardware and software versus real life. What are the limitations that you run into?
Well, in terms of what can be done, there's always things that are not possible to simulate like we wish. But of course, those are, let's call it advanced things or details. The main focus usually is, to me at least, is to get the facts straight. Let's put it this way. The engine itself is really, really good, and it's really flexible. I know there are new games around, there are new, more modern physics engines around, but I think people sometimes underestimate what can be done with, for example, the tire model or the physics engine itself that ISI created and it's used in AMS. It's really possible to do a lot more than even the devs or even the modders of the past were able to achieve. It's because it's one of those platforms that time pays off, and the more you work with it, the more you learn, the more you are able to do next time and next time and next time. And that has been, to me, one of the joys and one of the advantages of working mod after mod or in various iterations of the same mod with you guys. Has been the fact that I learn the engine more and more and more. And it's really clear that, to me, that the full potential of the engine was never realized even. And it's something that I know people think or assume in the community that the devs or the big mod teams know everything about the engine. They can snap their fingers and anything happens. But no, because of one simple reason, which is, there's a lot of talk about real data and that you should just implement the real data in the engine. And from the other side, it comes out a car that will behave just like the real thing. But this is not true. This is not true because of one simple thing, which is tires. Tires are very, very hard to simulate. And to the point that, in my opinion, no game, no sim, no platform has tires understood fully. They all do a good job in recreating a tire. But there's a difference between creating a mathematical model and putting the right combination of numbers so that on the other side comes out a tire that behaves like a real tire. And this is always the challenge, to do anything that drives correctly, because you have everything else in the car. You can have suspension geometry, you can have the weight distribution, you can have the even stranger data like inertia, chassis flex, that kind of, you can have all that and you can put all that in the game. But then the last step is usually to create a tire that makes it work and makes it perform like it should. And this is the bulk of my work many times when I'm working on a new mod. And I can give you an example. We are working, as you know, on a mod for next year for our league. And in the last 2 weeks, I clocked 3,000 kilometers offline with a test car that I have running, just to adjust tire behavior. And when I say tire behavior, I'm not even talking about heat or pure performance, just the behavior of the tire, just how the tire reacts when you do this, when you do that. It's really, really an in-depth work. And it's, of course, there is real data and real guidelines that I follow. But at the end of the day, there's always some massaging that you need to do to make things work. Because, of course, let's not forget, this is just a mathematical model, an approximation of the real thing. And as such, there's even blanks on the real data that you have to fill yourself. And this is always a work of patience and a work of many hours driving, testing myself, until things are at a good level. And it's very important to test yourself. And that's why I believe that a good physics creator has to be a good driver, or at least a sensible driver, because you have to be able to change things in the car and go to the track, test them immediately, and feel the difference.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And it's funny when the way you describe the notion of, well, if I have this data and I just plug it in, I ought to get the same stuff in the outside. Anybody who follows real life racing with any regularity knows that race engineers constantly run into situations where on paper, what they've come up with, in theory, should work with no problem. And then they go to the track and they're seconds off the pace and they're left scratching their heads. What happened? Why is this not doing what I want it to do? And they have to go back and massage it and try something else. What works in numbers, in theory, doesn't always translate to the actual experience. And the same thing is true in what you're doing with physics. You have to be willing to test it. You have to be willing to take the extra time and be willing to endure frustration. And a lot of people don't realize that when you're working on a mod, whether it's physics or modeling or sounds or painting a car or any of these things, a lot of the work that you do ends in a cul-de-sac, and you have to turn around and go back and do something else.
Oh, very true.
Yeah, you just have to do that. I mean, it's a labor of love. It's something that we spend hours and hours late at night working on. So, I mean, as far as research for mods, I mean, you were talking about tires. Like, where do you get the initial research for the tires? Obviously from books, but I'm curious, like, how much of the research that you do is available online, and how much of it you actually have to go and find in physical books somewhere?
Well, online, usually there's a lot of general information, papers and stuff from research that is publicly available, thankfully. But usually, that's the general information that you need to know, so that you know what you're doing to start with. So that you just don't go to the tire file and input impossible numbers, and then the tire does things that cannot be done in real life, which I've seen. I've seen that in mods, believe me. But that's usually what you can find on the internet. Of course, you can find some other general things, like depending on what you're searching, general things in terms of power or something. This about hard data. But usually, and this is something that I want to stress, because I don't think people realize this, the real data, the data, especially about race cars, can only be found usually on books dedicated to the subject. And when I say books, I mean really, let's suppose I have here, for this mod that we are doing next year, I have at least one book about a specific car. I have one book about the whole history of the cars, the annuary about the season, other books about other cars that, are approximate or from the next year or the season or something like this. I spent a lot of money in books, actually, to research for this. But to me, I like reading it. It's also a way that I get to learn about my favorite cars and things about the racing. I learn as I do this. I learn about the cars. I learn about the physics themselves. I learn about what the teams had to do to make them work, like you said before. But it's a lot of research. Yes, I've spent, no exaggeration, I don't know, a month reading stuff, and I'm still not finished. I still have a lot to read. And then taking notes of everything that is that can be used immediately as data to create the physics. But online, and this is something that it's important, at least the way I see that the mods should be done and this kind of work should be done. What you can find online that is really useful sometimes, it's onboards, or, well, of course, interviews, the drivers, of the engineers. But onboards are especially important, because nothing tells me how the car goes around the track like seeing it in video. And if this video has telemetry, even better. Because if we have telemetry, then that would be even better. But that's usually, since we dedicate ourselves to historic stuff, that's impossible to find usually. And it's very important, because to me there's a clear distinction between, like I said before, putting numbers there, and the car goes around in something that people think it's believable. And you drive it, you think, okay, yeah, I can imagine that this drove like this. Or I'm looking at the driver and I'm seeing the inputs he's doing, where he's braking, where he's accelerating, how the car is behaving to his inputs, and then trying to replicate that.
I would imagine just watching the hand movements of the driver is useful in and of itself.
No, yes.
Because you can see when he's applying opposite lock, things of that nature. I mean, we could have a conversation, an entire podcast on just tires at some point. But, I mean, I have a feeling we've just barely scratched the surface in that. But one other thing that we need to talk about is the process of quashing exploits in mods. And just like in real life, where a team or a driver looks for a loophole in the rules or something that they can exploit to get an advantage. I mean, it's human nature. It's the nature of competition. You look for a way to find an edge. I mean, that's what it's all about. And that also extends to looking for something that maybe was overlooked by the governing body in real life. And the same kind of dynamic exists in sim racing. You do all this work, you create a mod that you think is very accurate to what you want it to be, and then you go and release it and start a season, and suddenly you discover that one person or maybe two have found a way to get an edge out of it that other people just aren't seeing. Talk a bit about that problem and how you combat situations like that.
Oh yes, and that happened in the past, even with us, to my immense frustration. Because of course, imagine I have all the work, I create a car and I think, yes, this drives really beautifully, and then someone comes along, realizes that if they do something completely weird in the setup or in the driving style, they can go quicker, and the car looks absolutely nothing like I wanted it to look going around the track.
Mm-hmm.
And that happened before, of course. And basically what I started doing then was I started taking note of the typical exploits that exist in the games or in content created for these games, and specifically to the ISI engine. And it's like, for sure you heard, and everybody heard, that there are people that go about using the exact same setup everywhere. And when I say the exact same setup, I'm not saying that the same numbers, I'm saying the same direction. It's very common to hear, I just go there, I put the springs to minimum, I put the dampers to minimum, and the rebound to max, this kind of stuff, and that's it. And I do that for every mod, every car, and it always works. Of course, I had to search and understand and test. This is the important part, always testing. Why would that work always? What was happening? Because I know how the engine works more or less, and unless there was something clearly wrong with the engine, and that's not out of the realm of possibilities, of course, but I had to find out. So I had to go and see, okay, let me see if I do a car that is really, really strange, if I can replicate this in a consistent basis or something, and then I can iron it out somehow. And I had to pay attention to how these people are driving and what these people are doing. And that's one of the advantages that we have a league, is because I can see them driving. And from one way or another, many times I can get a setup. And then I can understand, so that's what they're doing. Okay, so if I want to stop this, I need to see, okay, in real life, and this is the important thing, it's not just a matter of, okay, I go there, I make, I don't know, a horrible tire so that on purpose so that this person cannot do this. It's not like that. No, I look at the real life and I think, okay, why in real life they didn't do this? And then let's imagine, okay, they didn't do this because if they would lower the car so much, the car would bounce off the track and they would lose time, they would lose downforce, things like this, for example. And then I would be like, okay, so I have to do something in the game so that this happens. And they are forced to drive or to set up the car like they should. And this is very important because my main motivation when I do mods for the league is to recreate the experience of the competition in that particular series or race. So it's very important when you look from the outside, and we had this experience on USAC even. When you look from the outside, if you see the cars are going around in the pack in a different way than in reality, then something's wrong. Then we overlooked something, and I need to see, okay, what is happening, and why is our experience not replicating the real one like we want? Because it's all fine to have a car that drives like you want if you're alone, but it's more important, especially to me, that we are recreating the real experience of the real drivers in the seasons that we run. Because after all, we are an historic league, at least in the majority of the stuff we organize, and we pride ourselves that, okay, we want to run the full season with full distance, all the races. And so to me, of course, we also need to make the driving and the racing experience as close as it was in that particular series. And it's a big job also to fine-tune things like fuel or drafting or reliability to fine-tune all those things so that you have the experience that, okay, yes, I'm doing an F191 season. I'm not doing some, quasi-esque facsimile of some Formula One season with cars that actually look like 91 cars. There's a difference here. I want people to suffer. Suffer might be the wrong word here, but you have the same obstacles and the same challenges that they had in the real season with these kinds of cars, with these kinds of drivers. It's very important, and I think we have been doing a great job lately in that, because you can even see the difference when you look at our broadcasts. You can see the difference about how the cars are going about the track and how they used to. And to me, that's a sign of a job well done. But of course, like David Saber very famously wrote, the job is never finished.
It is never finished. A designer's work, a creator's work, is never truly complete. You're always looking for ways to improve. You're always looking for ways to fine tune, and as you've pointed out in this conversation, even when you think you've nailed it, even when you think you have it exactly right, invariably there's going to be feedback that causes you to reevaluate it. So it's always best to keep an open mind and think, okay, this is an ongoing process. So you've alluded to the experience that we try to provide with ISO in the last few minutes that we have available here. Where do you think, obviously, you don't want to make the mod so challenging that it puts people off, Is there kind of a line that you try to walk at times between challenge and enjoyment, or do you think that you should just focus on getting it as accurate as possible, and the fun comes from said challenge? Is that more of an accurate statement of how we do things?
I would think so. I think you perfectly worded it. Yes, the challenge should come from the difficulty itself. Like one of our users said, for example, F1 is not supposed to be easy. I'm not saying that the car should be undrivable or that it should be a pain to drive in a way that it doesn't respond to your inputs as it should. That's different. That's a mark of a bad job. No. What I'm saying is that I never cut corners to allow for people to just come in and be quick out of the gate or something like this, because you're not supposed to. I mean, It's like there's a reason why you need to spend time in the track. You need to spend time to learn the car. You need to spend time to learn how to set up the car to be quick, even in real life. And of course, the challenge increments exponentially when you go up the ladder of motor racing. Yes, of course, if we are doing a championship or a race where we are using, I don't know, like low-powered touring cars, it will be easier maybe to get up at speed than it will be for full-blown F1 cars or Indy cars or that kind of high-level racing. Of course, we know that high-level racing is what people are more drawn upon to, but they should realize that, okay, there's a reason why it's called high-level racing, because everything has to be high-level, including you. Like, you go to a track with a car, maybe even in the beginning of the season, you are not quick yet, and you have to lap, you have to learn, but then after that process, you are up to speed, you are up to knowing the car, you are up to knowing how you should race it. And at least in the work that I do, it seems that to happen that someone new comes and they are not up to speed immediately, because there's a learning curve. There is, like I said before, they cannot just use the tricks they were used to use with other mods or content. They have to look at it and see, okay, no, I need to learn something here. I cannot just come here, 5 minutes before a race, and we get that a lot, unfortunately. 5 minutes before the race, I do some laps, I'm going to be up to speed fine. No, in fact, some people claim they cannot keep the cars on the track, or that it's too hard, or that they're blowing tires or breaking stuff. And it's, well, but this is because it's not that it's hard to drive the cars. I never make a car that is hard to drive, in the sense that I don't make cars that just self-spin or anything like this. But I do make cars that can be challenging to go really quick with. And of course, I replicate the same challenges they were in real life, be it the physics of the car, the vehicle dynamics, or be the challenges like we now have, for example, the fuel consumption, which is, I think, a great challenge and historically accurate for a lot of seasons, a lot of racing series. And people have to learn all that. But the nice thing after this is that then your experience and the racecraft that you learn and the technical ability that you learn, then it counts. It really counts. And like I say, a lot of times, I want the Alan Prosts and the Niki Laudas of the league to shine. I want them to stand a chance. I don't want people that think, because that's what happens in like we said before, in other games, mods, etc. I don't want people to think that they come here, they drive something that we did, and it's just going to be a hot lap contest until the end. No, it's not, because that's not how it was in real life.
Well, this has been a really enlightening conversation, and I want to thank Richard Wilks for joining us, and I'm sure that we're going to have more conversations along these lines going forward. So we have interesting stuff coming up in the next few weeks. We've got the Hungaroring, and then we're going back on the Michigan High Banks, and we've got a new toy from you, Richard. We got a boost knob to play with now. So that's going to be fun.
It's going to be very tempting for people, because it's very, very easy to just crank it up and pass everybody or drive into the distance. But of course, there's a price.
Kablooey.
You could either hurt the reliability of your engine, or you can indeed use much more fuel, and you'll be forced to have an extra pit stop that ruins your chances. That's the thing. But of course, the good thing about that in particular is that now, just like in real life, overtaking or catching up with the field is now possible, because you can just use it to your advantage in the right moment.
All right. Well, I'll let you go. Thanks so much for your time, and thanks to all of you for listening to our second ISO podcast. We'll be back with another podcast soon. Until then, everyone take care and be safe. Thanks for listening.